Hi, everyone. We will go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this Education Transformation 2020 presentation. It'll be on balanced discourse, amplifying voices in the online discussion forum. So my name is Sarah Chandler, and I am on the training and support team here at Hawks Learning. And our speaker today is Professor Julie Oni of Pepperdine University. So Professor Julie T. Oni is a Los Angeles-based playwright and English professor. She teaches English composition, composition for English language learners, American language and culture, and dramatic literature at Pepperdine University. And we are so excited that she is here to share with us her experience and insight today. So we do have a large audience, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible. So Joanna Graber of Hawks Learning is a course implementation specialist, and she is also joining us today in the background of our webinar. So she will try to answer as many questions as she can. And then at the very end, we will have a Q&A for about 10 minutes with Professor Oni, and she can answer some of those questions that we might be saving until the end. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Professor Oni.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. So this is really exciting because I've been watching a lot of the other webinars that have been going on. So I've been inspired by all of you guys, and I'm really excited to have you here to just share a little bit about the experience I've had the past couple months. So I'm calling this lesson Balanced Discourse, Amplifying Voices in the Online Discussion Forum. And my goal is really just to be, it's pretty anecdotal. I'm just going to share a little bit about some kind of joys and challenges I've had with this strategy over the past couple months. So here we go. First of all, a little bit about me. So I am a Nigerian American playwright, and I mention this just because as someone with a multiple identity background, I am kind of hyper aware of giving a balanced voice to multiple identities and all of the various identities within the classroom. And I think that we have a kind of unique situation going on right now in the remote instructional format in this regard. So I thought I would share a little bit about some strategies that I've been working with. I mentioned that I'm a playwright and English professor just because the examples I'm going to provide are from those classes. And again, I've been watching a lot of these webinars, so I realized that there's a lot of math people involved in Hawks. And so it's been really interesting to see the strategies that you guys are sharing. I hope that we can have a conversation afterwards about how some of the things that I'm sharing might be utilized within other areas as well. And then I'm just mentioning here, my LMS is Sakai. So you guys are going to see some examples of that. I just thought I would make you aware off the bat that that's a program that I'm working from. So a very brief story. I'm calling this an online navigation narrative. Like many of you all at the end of last spring, I found myself in the situation of needing to do remote instruction, which I hadn't done before. And my Pepperdine has a really great workshop that they provide for doing online strategies. So I had done training a couple of times already, and I felt pretty confident. And I had already been doing blogs for my classes for about 5 years. But what happened was I said, okay, now it's not just about using a blog, it's about having the entire class online. And I felt that I was able to kind of manage that with the fact that I already had a relationship with these students that had been going on for several weeks by the time we went remotely. And so they were comfortable with the style of my PowerPoints and things like that. And I could kind of just put my lessons online and do some screen captures and things like that. But what happened was I knew I was going to be going into the summer teaching 2 courses that were going to be entirely online. And so I didn't want to just kind of complete things for a class. I wanted to make the strongest version of a class that would be entirely contained online. And so that was kind of the journey that I was engaging with. And I think, again, that it's something that a lot of us, if you didn't do a summer class, a lot of us are dealing with right now heading into the fall semester. So I had a couple of questions that I was trying to deal with. And just a little bit of background here. my summer courses are 5 days a week for a month. So they're every single day. And I knew that I wasn't going to be entirely synchronous every single day. So I said, how can I, on the asynchronous days, make sure that my students are still engaged, right? We were going to have Zoom lessons on Mondays and Fridays. And so I wanted to figure out what to do on those 3 center days. So that was my first question. And the second question was, how can I keep less vocal students participating online, right? That traditionally you have your standard, few students that might be most engaged in face-to-face or Zoom class. How could I make sure that even on those asynchronous days, students who tend to not have a voice, how could I allow them to have a voice, right? How could I utilize this format to actually give these students more power and more of a say in the classroom than maybe they were capable of having in a lot of situations that were conversational. So those were kind of the 2 questions that I was dealing with. And my answer is what I call an ode to forums, right? Which is what this presentation is about. And, I've been reading about different ideas people have about forums. And I realized that for different people, there's kind of some challenges, which I'm going to get to in a moment. But for courses like English composition and I think literature, I feel like they work really well, and I'm going to give you guys some examples. So just a little bit of context. This is just a screen capture from my syllabus. I let my students know right off the bat, right, what the class format is going to be. I let them know when we're going to Zoom and when they're required to do attendance. So they know from day 1 that this is an essential part of the class. And in the grade breakdown on the syllabus, I also let them know participation is 10% of your grade, and that includes Zoom or forum, whichever we're doing that day or that week, right? And just to give you guys just a little bit of information here, the participation score is, as I mentioned, 10% of their grade, and I give them 10 points each day, whether it's for Zoom or for forum. So for the forum, if they give a full response, I require them to not only provide their own response, but also to give one to at least one classmate. So if they're doing that fully, they'll get those 10 points. If they forget to provide their own response, but only reply to a classmate, which oddly does happen sometimes, right? They'll get just 5 points. If they only provide their own response, but they're not interested in, or they don't feel they have the time for engaging with, at least one classmate, then they're not going to get full credit either. And of course, there's some numbers in between here and there, depending on the content of their responses. So that's the way that I go about grading things. And I'd be happy to share more about this with you, but I think that what I'm planning to do as I continue with the fall semester is my composition courses are twice a week. And so I'm planning for one of those days to be Zoom and one of them to be a discussion forum. And so it's going to be a half and half between those 2 things again. So this is just an example from my, I said, okay, I'm going to embark on this journey of doing these discussion forums. And there were a lot of other things that I was changing and developing about my teaching and my classes, but this is just the main one I'm focusing on here. So what happened was the first class that I taught was dramatic literature. I had 30 students in the class. And the first day I said, okay, we're going to do some icebreaker introductions and talk about our experience with drama in the forum. And this was just kind of my first day experience. And as you can see here, this was definitely an OMG moment for me, because as I mentioned, I had 30 students, and you can see here, there were 125 messages. So what this meant was, and probably 30 of these are my responses. So by the end of the day, when I looked at the responses, there were definitely people who had responded not only to the required one person, but to multiple people, right? And so I could see that they were engaging in a detailed conversation. So again, this is just an example that showed me from the first day, wow, there's a lot of power and a lot of possibility here. I blurred out names here, right? But this is just, and I'm not going to read through all these in detail, but this is just an example, right? One student in his introduction said I was supposed to be doing an international program in London, and now I'm stuck at home. So, here I am. And just the student responses were fantastic, great to hear. I was also supposed to go to London. So I could see off the bat that there was a lot of really, a lot of connectivity that was going on, which was fantastic. So this is just a glimpse, right, as things continued throughout the semester. You can see, so this is what things look like in our Sakai, which we call courses, in the forums tab. There's just a lot of detail here. And I would keep these on, right, so that they could see and go back to them if they wanted to. So now that I've shown you guys kind of what this looks like and how it works, I just want to talk about some challenges, right? I definitely need to mention that, as I said earlier, it really depends on the kind of teaching you're doing, the way that your school works, the classes you teach, and things like that, right? As I mentioned here, these work best for smaller classes. For composition courses at Pepperdine, typically we max out around 18 students, so it's pretty manageable, but obviously for a larger class, it's not necessarily the case. I would say if you have a larger class, but you also have a TA, then it could be manageable to have them help you navigate. Or also for a larger class, maybe you only require a few students each week instead of everyone to engage in the discussion, but I do think that they're really beneficial even for a larger class if possible. They require advanced preparation. So what I mean by this is I created them, and I'm going to show you some examples in a moment. I created them to very clearly connect with the topic of the day or the lesson of the day. So this means that I needed to map out well in advance, which was kind of complicated for a daily class, right? What each lesson was going to be and how I was going to tie each discussion forum to those lessons. So it takes a lot of preparation. It's not where I can just say at the start of the day, okay, let me just make it. I wanted to make sure that it was tied to that lesson. And I always wanted to post them well in advance, just because I had students all around the world, and I usually would give them, I always gave them until midnight on the day it was due, right? So that they could work within their own time. It necessitates frequent observation. So I usually wouldn't respond until after the midnight deadline, unless there was something that was going on that I felt like I needed to jump on. But I would look throughout the day just to make sure that people were responding and that posts were working and things like that, right? There were a couple of times where I would notice that the first person who was responding had maybe done an incorrect response, and I would jump on that quickly and let that person know, either delete it or ask them to adjust, so that I could make sure everyone else didn't copy the incorrect response, right? So that's another example for frequent observation. Another thing that I think we all have to be aware of is a monitoring, right? Where we have students who've grown up in the age of social media, we have a situation of keyboard courage. So things that students might not say face-to-face in the classroom in a discussion forum, again, knowing your student body is really, I think, important and useful. But in many cases, there can be a situation where, you know, writing could be misinterpreted in an offensive way or something like that. And again, I said many cases, I mean rare cases for me. There were a couple of times where I felt a need to kind of jump into a conversation before the end of the day, just to make sure that the students knew that I was aware of what was going on and that I was observing things. And then the fifth challenge that I want to mention is that I think they work best with individualized faculty feedback, right? That these are dialogues not only among students, but between me and my students as well, right? And so again, in the fall, I'm going to be teaching 4 classes. And so it's going to be something that can be a little bit more challenging to navigate. So that's why I think for, you know, depending on the size of your classes, it might make more sense to do this maybe every couple weeks or, you know, once a month or something like that. And I would love to hear ideas and strategies you guys have for how to space these out so that they can be managed as well. So those are the challenges I wanted to mention. And I'm sure there's other ones you guys can think of, but they're the main ones that I kind of encountered. But this is going to lead into why I think forums work really well. The first point is they exercise course-related skills. And again, this depends on the content of the prompts that you're creating, but I'll show you guys a few that I think worked really well. They provide time for critical thinking. So as I mentioned, right, I teach classes that are pretty diverse in their content, where I have a mixture of domestic and international students in many cases. And I have students who are coming from backgrounds where they're very confident with immediate response in the classroom and students who are not. And so I feel like there's so many times where I've had students come to my office hours and I say, you know, you need to work on your participation in class. I want to make sure that I'm hearing your ideas. And the response I get in some cases is, oh, it's very intimidating and it's hard to come up with an immediate response for some students, right? So I like the idea of being able to allow some time for students to think about their responses to things that we're discussing in class. As I already mentioned, they instigate interactivity, right, among students and with me as well. And this was something that I felt the students really benefited from, especially this summer when we were, at the beginning of quarantine, where people were striving for and really longing for that human connection. There's a springboard for self-reflection. Again, this depends on the content of the prompts that you're creating, but I think in many cases, I was able to get students to reflect in a way that maybe they wouldn't have even done in so much depth in just a standard class discussion. They encourage creativity. This is another part of another kind of connection to what the specific prompts are that you're creating. And then number 6, which is really important, and that's why it's part of the title that I've created for this presentation, is that they amplify all voices, right? That in any given class, we all know how it goes. You have your same kind of 3 or 4 people who tend to always raise their hands and always offer responses. And this is the case in Zoom as well, right? But in a discussion forum, something that I noticed in my experience has been that every student has a voice, right? That instead of just hearing a response to any given question from just a few people, you see a response from every single student in your class, right? And you're able to engage in conversation with every single student instead of just the few people that are, around you, or the few that tend to be talking the most often. And as someone who tends to have, like I've said, a diverse classroom in which I'm hyper aware of, equality among the voices in the room, this is something that is really valuable, that I definitely have appreciated about the forums a lot. And I honestly think that when I go back to face-to-face, I might still be using them for this reason. So I just wanted to, kind of conclude things by sharing a few different prompts that I've had. This is what it looks like. So this is from the second forum for my dramatic literature course, right? So the question was, who is a dramatic character for whom you have felt great pity and sympathy, even though he or she was quite different from you, and why? So a few things that I was working on with this prompt: it encourages a distinct response, right? So it's not saying based on the play we read today, it's not saying everybody write about Titanic or something like that, right? It's broad, so it's allowing each of them to choose something that's personal to them. So that's number 2, it requires personal reflection, which is a big part of all of my courses, is that the content we're reading and the writing my students are doing allows them to self-reflect. It inspires critical thinking and creativity. I'm not just saying, give me the title of, the film you want to talk about, but I'm saying analyze that character and how you feel sympathy for him or her. And then it also demonstrates comprehension of that day's topic, right? We were talking about fear and pity and drama in the context of Aristotle. So they were able to demonstrate their comprehension, of that topic, right? So this is just, a sample prompt. And this is an example of one of the students' responses, right? Which again, this was my second day, right, doing this, and it was really exciting. So the student talked about how he connected with the character of Thor. For anyone who's seen this in Avengers Endgame, and I'm not going to read through all of it, but I had seen it and could totally visualize it as I was reading his description. And you can see the detail here and the depth of self-reflection, right? So it talks about how this character is in a moment where he's kind of dealing with his mistakes, and we can see this physically and mentally in the character. And the student is saying, I've made mistakes in my life. It was hard to watch. It was relatable. So he's giving us a really detailed personal response to this scenario, right? And you can see that his classmates appreciated this. So I love this movie. I also felt pity for him. I love those movies and enjoyed your analysis. This is a really good analysis. I relate a lot. So the students were having a very detailed conversation here, right? So I have my yay. I was very, very excited to see this. So that's one example. Another example, this is from my composition course, where I asked students to use the content from the reading of that day and analyze this ad. So just a little bit of context is that a paper that they write asks them to analyze a contemporary ad and talk about how it captures elements of American culture. And so this is asking them to utilize that reading and break this down. So a few things it does: it ties to the reading of the day. It requires comprehension of the vocabulary, which in this case, we were talking about elitism and populism. It necessitates ad analysis, right, which is a part of what they're working on for the essay, and it encourages collaboration. And what I mean by that is they ended up collaborating with each other by saying, oh, I liked how you mentioned that about the ad, right? And I'll show you this in a moment. They had really useful conversations with each other. And this was all really valuable practice for what they were going to be doing in their own writing for the upcoming essay, right? So again, just an example, I love that the student began with, I believe that, right? And then he put his full kind of detailed response here. And you can see the classmates replying, I love your sharing, I love your point, great insight, I appreciate your note. So again, they were taking their time to fully read what he was saying, and they're responding to specific things that they appreciated about his description. So it can be very fulfilling for the student and very encouraging to know that you are connecting to your readers, even with just a short paragraph like this, right? Really, really useful for my composition courses. The last example I wanted to share with you is I found great success in allowing my students to share some of their research on forum. So this was from, again, from the composition course, where I asked them to find an article and talk about how it could relate to their topic for the paper, summarize it, and then provide a quote. And so this encouraged them to prepare for their assignments, right? Because this was a source that hopefully they would be using in their paper. It showed their confidence in research and evaluating sources, which we'd already gone through in our lesson. And then it allowed them to practice MLA with quoting, right? So it was achieving a bunch of things. And I think that the responses they gave to each other helped them to kind of deal with and respond to what they, were understanding about their research process and things like that. And again, I was able to engage in conversation with all the different things they were doing as well. So again, student responses, and something that I really liked about this prompt was this was the first time that they were all sharing what their topics were. So this student had chosen to write about Vine and its effects and how it led to TikTok and other different apps that are going on right now. And so he had a really detailed response. He shared his source, right? And again, seeing the response here to his topic and to his research, it was really great to see. So these are just 3 examples, right? I have so many that I wasn't able to go through all of them, but I just wanted to share some other things that I did that I thought worked really well. So I put here video sharing. I did this in a few different ways. Some of the prompts included my posting of videos where I asked students to kind of respond to their content. Sometimes I had them for an assignment create a short video and then post it there and respond to each other. I was able to do peer reviews here, and I realized there's a lot of different tools and platforms, but what I'm really trying to do, and I would love to hear everyone's response, I'm trying to allow my students to be in our LMS as much as possible instead of going into other platforms to do their work, right? The more that I can house all the content for the class in the smallest amount of places, in my opinion, the better. And so I found a lot of success in peer reviews where I was able to have the students post their papers, and I would put, here are the people who are responding to these people, here are the questions that you're responding to. They would put a Google Doc link, that way they could enter each other's documents and type notes, and then they could also respond to their peers. So that worked well. Thesis practice worked really well, where I would give them, there was one assignment I did where I had everyone read an article, and I said, craft a thesis that's utilizing some content or a response that you have to this article, for example, right? And it was just showing different strategies, reflections on assignments. So I got some really interesting reflections where after we had a major assignment, I asked them to talk about what were their joys and challenges, and those were a great space for kind of commiserating on what had happened with the assignment, and of course, reading responses as well. So I like the ability to have a variety of things going on all within this space, right? My students were able to be very confident and comfortable in utilizing the forum just because we did so many things there, so many different things. This is just the final example I wanted to share of just kind of the power and the strength that I noticed in the forums. So a little bit of context here, if anyone's familiar with the Amiri Baraka play, Dutchman, it's from 1964, and it's about the execution of a Black man on a New York subway. and it's about the lack of justice that happens. Basically, his killer has nothing happens as a result. There's no punishment for her, and everyone kind of just continues with their lives after his death. So it was a really interesting moment for me to be teaching this play literally right during the time of George Floyd's death. And I didn't say too much before we did this discussion because these were happening before we had our Zoom class, but I just simply asked in this prompt for my students to talk about any themes that they noticed from that play. And the depth of response that I got, this is just one example here, right? I had a student that had a really detailed reflection on how he felt that what was going on in this play was identical to contemporary culture, right? And the reason why I'm sharing this is because I think that in forums, even though I talked about the possible drawback of students maybe not, maybe getting into some sort of like arguments, social media style, right? I do think that there's power in students feeling that they can have their voice in a way that they might not be able to articulate verbally in some cases, at least in the immediate situation of a classroom or Zoom discussion. I could tell that he really thought through what he was saying here, and I could see that his classmates appreciated that, right? So in the situation where you're dealing with really complex and, you know, really polarizing contemporary topics, I think the discussion forum provides an opportunity for dealing with a lot of these because students feel a little more confidence in engaging with these really important issues, right? And as I said, his classmates appreciated this. They could say, I agree with this. I like that you brought in modern day. Unfortunately, it does feel contemporary. So this is just, again, one of the highlights for me that I really felt like it was an example of how students were able to amplify their voices in a way that they might not even feel as confident doing in a face-to-face environment. So I just wanted to share that with you guys because I found it to be really powerful. So those are just some examples. Like I said, I have so many other ones. I'd be happy to share more and talk more with you guys about things that I felt worked and some challenges that I encountered. I have my email here, and I really just wanted to kind of engage in conversation with you guys to hear what everyone else is doing, right? Like I said, this was something that was definitely a learning experience for me over the summer. And it's something that I'm going to continue to learn through and kind of work out and try to perfect as much as possible over the fall semester. So I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. Yeah, so I'm ready for our discussion.
Thank you so much, Professor Oni. That was amazing. I'll go ahead and just start reading off some of these questions that have came in. And I'll start first with Professor Michael wants to know, do you think it makes sense to grade forums for content or simply mark whether they did it or not?
So that's a really good question. I guess I wouldn't say necessarily, in my opinion, grading them for content as far as, and you saw that example that I just gave, you know, if my student had said something that maybe I disagreed with in response to Black Lives Matter or something like that, that's definitely not the content, obviously, that I would be criticizing. But if I'm asking for them to engage with a strategy that's required for, you know, an assignment or something like that, and I feel like, you know, for example, if they're supposed to be demonstrating confidence in MLA and they're not doing that, or if the thesis is supposed to follow a certain structure and they're not doing that, then I felt a responsibility to dock them a little bit just so that they could be aware of what was required, right? And I would always type a response. I would never put their scores into the forum, right? That would just be something I would send to them independently. But I would definitely type a comment into the forum saying, oh, how about this? Did you think about that? Make sure you're doing this. So I feel that giving a score allows them to make sure they're focusing on the prompt and make sure that they're reading the daily lesson. And one other thing that I forgot to mention was that for each forum I had my students do, I always provided my own example, which was included in the lesson for that day, where I would say, when you go into forum, this is what the prompt for today is going to say. And here's my example of a response, right? So they always knew exactly how I had done it. And so I could tell sometimes from student responses that they had not looked at my example, right? So if I could see that was happening and they weren't totally getting it, Usually this would happen maybe for the first couple, and then they would get the picture and say, oh, I really need to read her examples, and then they would be fine and getting 10 out of 10s afterward. So this is just, you know, my personal strategy. I definitely think that there are some people who for forums kind of do a credit, no credit strategy, and I think that that could work as well. It really depends on the content and what you're going for in the forums.
Okay, great. Next question we have is from Professor Santi Esteban, and she asks, how do you score forum responses that are poorly written? No proofreading, numerous errors, written more like a text message than an academic response?
That's a good question. And again, something that I am familiar with because I do teach a lot of English language learners. Not to say that English language learners don't have good punctuation, because actually that's not the case, but I understand what you're saying. If I feel like it's an issue where, and I did have this with a couple of students over the summer where I felt like they weren't getting a lot of responses from their classmates because their writing was hard to follow. If that were the case, I would probably maybe ask the student to join in office hours with me or something like that, and make sure the student knew, make sure that you're working on these and that they're a little more polished, right? I didn't have too many issues with that, but if it did happen frequently, then I might contact that person. Because it was important to me that everyone was getting a response, right? And that was something I noticed was if they weren't writing as clearly as possible, then it could be a challenge. Thinking into, because I didn't teach my ESL course over the summer, I was teaching courses that had kind of a blend of students, but thinking into the fall, having my ESL courses, right? I definitely think that if there are students who are dealing with challenges with grammar and things like that, I don't anticipate grading them down, but I anticipate reaching out to them just in response to whatever the issues might be that I noticed there. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. That marking them down for a forum, I think, is not as effective as it would be for like a standard paper or something like that with grammatical issues.
Okay. And then Professor Jeff says, you said in your composition course, you plan to have one day on Zoom, synchronous, and another using forums, asynchronous. Are you also producing video presentations or lectures that students are responsible for? It seems that only one day of online interaction per week might not be enough to cover all of the subject matter.
That's definitely true. So I didn't show, the main goal for me was just to kind of focus on my discussion forums, right? Because I felt like I couldn't talk about everything I'm doing here, but I have many different components to my classes. And on the asynchronous days, they're very active. I have fully written out online lectures that they're reading through. So I call it a lecture to the students because it's kind of a little more informal where I'm having a conversation with them about the reading and the content of that day. So even on days when we don't have Zoom, they are fully interacting with the lesson that I've created. In many cases, because it's composition, almost every day they have some writing due. So in addition to the forums, they're either writing a proposal or an outline or a draft of a paper or something like that. And they have textbook readings and lessons every day as well. So definitely I agree with you that doing the Zooms would not be sufficient. There's a lot of other content. And even on the days when I do Zooms, if it's not, in many cases, it's a part of what's being done on that day. And even though there's not a forum, they're also engaging with a reading or, written content for that day. So those are other things that are a part of my courses that I didn't really mention, but it's definitely, there's a lot that's going on that they're engaging with in addition to the forums and Zooms.
Okay. Next question we have here is from Professor Carr, and he wants to know if students try to respond later to a discussion forum, would you still accept them?
So no, I don't accept late work. I mean, there can be extreme cases. So what I do have in my syllabus that I think I didn't put on here was I allow for them to have 3 unexcused absences, right? Which in a typical class would mean, missing class. In this case, they're allowed without really any questions asked to miss a Zoom or a forum, right? But as far as making them up, I do have some students who might email me a response and say, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to do it. I might give them a reply, especially if it's dealing with important content that they need in preparation for an assignment. But even if I reply to them, I'm most likely not going to give them credit, right? Unless there's some sort of situation that the school contacts me about to let me know that they need an extension or something like that.
Okay. Next we have Professor Oki wants to know, can you explain how you use it for attendance? If you leave the forums open for them to go back to, are you checking them daily and doing the attendance in your LMS system?
Yes, so I do the attendance in my LMS system. I have a gradebook there so they can see every single day. At the end of that day, after I read their response, I will put it right there into the gradebook and they'll immediately see it there. So yes, I do check it daily. And again, like I said, my summer classes were 5 days a week, so it was very time consuming, but I like to keep things up to date in that way. But again, I only have one class at a time for the summer. So for the fall, obviously my classes are not every day. I think it should be still manageable, but it's definitely something that I was doing, that I plan to do every single time that they have a response, to immediately put a score right there and for them to see where it is. So yeah, if they want to go back into it, there's not a way, because you saw how I have all of the prompts remain throughout the semester. So I never delete it after it's occurred, but what happens is there's always a timestamp on there. So if somebody is posting it, 15 hours later or something like that, then I will see it and I might respond, but I'm not going to give them the credit for that assignment.
Right, okay. Professor Pitts wants to know, do you provide guidelines for respectful responses and expectations?
Yes, so as I was mentioning, I always provide examples, right? I always show them, and that's kind of a fun part for me of the online lessons I do, to be honest. I really like creating kind of fun examples of responses. So I always will show that, within the lesson for that day, the written lesson, I will show them, here's the prompt you're going to be doing for today's forum, and here's my example, right? And then I might put a couple of pointers. Here are some things to work on. For prompts that are asking them to do research, I might say, here's a reminder of how to go through, how to navigate the library databases and things like that, right? So I definitely provide them with guidelines. And again, I feel like through the specific kinds of responses that I'm giving to them each day, they gain a sense for the depth that I'm expecting, right? Sometimes a couple of people might, for the first couple forums, have a very brief response, or not even in their responses to classmates might just say, hey, nice, cool, or something like that, right? But I want more detailed conversation going on, so that I would respond to that student and ask for a little more detail, just to give them a sense of how much content I expect them to include.
That sounds great. And I just want to skip around because I know Joanna let me know we have a couple of questions coming in that are specifically asking if you could share your scoring rubric that you use.
Okay, yeah, I'd be happy to share it. The main thing I do, so I don't give them a rubric every time they do it, right? But I can definitely show you kind of the breakdown. I could even maybe provide a document that shows you examples of prompts and how I might grade responses to those specific ones. So yeah, I'd be happy to share something like that.
Okay. And then other question is, everyone's really complimenting your presentation and want to know, where you get your animations in the program that you're using right now.
I could talk about this all day. So another thing that's been really fun for me over the summer, besides doing these forums and figuring all this out, has been the amazing program called Canva. If anybody is not familiar with it, I almost don't want to share my secret because I love it being kind of my thing, but I will share it with you guys. I make handouts on this. I really do everything. I stylize a lot of my content on my class page in this way. So Canva is amazing because you can make flyers, you can make posters, and many different things. And I just recently realized that you could also make presentations there, which is just so awesome and amazing. So that's what I use to create this. And you can, I think, subscribe for like 20 bucks a month or something if you want to have, because all the images that I use are free. But if you want to get the fancier images, then I think you pay the 20 bucks a month. But yeah, I just use the ones, and of course I have my Bitmoji here, but I use the ones that are on there that are standard. And I've used other programs before, And I feel like I was just talking to my sister about this the other day because she's also a professor, and we were talking about how we're kind of in shock that they provide so many things that are amazing that are free. So please go use it, Canva. Canva. It has, you just log on to the website, you create your own account, but you don't have to pay anything unless you want to use fancier things. I recommend it. I feel like my students started to enjoy it. I put in the little kind of animated things and stuff to keep things lively.
Yeah, that is good to know. Even for myself, I've used Canva before, but I didn't know that you could create presentations. So that is really cool.
Awesome.
And it looks like we might have time for just a couple more questions. So we have one right here from Professor Johnson that says, does your LMS allow for the requirement to post before being able to see classmates post? That could prevent the wrong answer issue that you had mentioned in your presentation.
Okay, to post before you see what classmates post. Oh, not that I'm aware of. So as far as I know, as soon as, and actually it's a little bit, it's even more complicated than that. And again, I'm still navigating this, so maybe I'm not fully aware, but what I realized was the students can't even delete their own posts. I've had students who have contacted me and said, can you please delete my post? I accidentally wrote the wrong thing, and only an administrator can do it. So I'm pretty sure that they're not able to do something like that. I really think that what ends up happening for a lot of students, to be honest, is nobody wants to be the first one to post. I mean, some people who are trying to just get it done with will, but I think a lot of people wait until at least halfway through the day so they can see what other people's responses are and then create their own. And I understand what you're saying. They could possibly be influenced by each other if they see what everyone else is saying. But I kind of like that because I realized what was happening was in somebody's, original post, they might say something that was in response to what other classmates had said. And I also felt that it allowed for more variety of responses, right? So for example, with that prompt talking about pitying a character, if the first person who responded had mentioned Thor, then nobody else most likely would respond with Thor, right? They would see what that person had done and try to choose something that was unique, which I really appreciated, as opposed to nobody knowing what other people had said and then everyone's talking about Thor, right? And then it becomes a little bit too repetitive. So I like that they're able to see each other's. I'm not familiar with other LMS systems, so there might be that possibility on something like Blackboard or something else, but it's not something that I'm aware of on Sakai.
Okay. And then last couple questions here. Professor Sommers wants to know, just clarifying, when you say forum, are you also meaning discussion board as they have a different software in their school?
Oh, okay, yeah. So this is what we call it, the forum on Sakai. And yes, it is a discussion board. So that's what this is, going back to my example here. Where did I have that? So yes, this is what it's called. So these are the different, and I can kind of choose which elements I want to include for my class, but these are the different things that I was using for the literature course. So forums that's exactly what it is. It's not something separate from a discussion board. It's exactly the same thing. And like I said, I'm only familiar with this particular format, but I'm pretty sure that it's probably rather similar on something like Blackboard or something like that. Basically, everyone's able to post a response and then respond to each other as you would in a discussion board. And I'm not able, I was about to click on one of these, but I realized it's just a screen capture, not a link. But if I were to click on it, you would see that once I click on each individual title, you can see every single response that's on there, just like you would on a discussion board.
Okay, sounds good. Well, it looks like that is about as much time as we have today. So thank you all so much for submitting your questions. And if we were not able to get to them, I know Professor Oni has said that she would be happy to answer your questions. And we also have our email right here. It is going to be marketing@hawkslearning.com that you can also email us for any questions you might have. So again, thank you so much for attending today, and thank you to Professor Oni for presenting, and we will be emailing out the link for this webinar that you can view. So thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.